An early radio disc jockey tackles controversial topics in the 60s and 70s of Washington, D.C. Adjust Your Color, The Truth of Petey Greene is a documentary from 2008 directed by Lauren Mendel that tells the story of one Petey Greene. I don't think it is going too far out on a limb, a revolutionary figure, not only in radio, but in Black history, and definitely worthy of review. In this documentary, selected by Vincent for this stop on Dock to School here on the Micheaux Mission. Vincent, what say you of Adjust Your Color, The Truth of Petey Greene?
This is, subject-wise, one of my favorite kinds of documentary. And that is one that covers a topic that I don't know much about.
Oh, okay.
And then the documentary teaches me about it. And Petey Greene is very much one of these figures that we've kind of been talking about throughout this episode, actually. These kind of figures in Black history that don't necessarily cross over into the broader history. Petey Greene was, as you said, he was many things. You know, they called him like a mouth and maybe a comedian, but he's best known as someone who hosted a show originally on the radio in Washington, D.C., and then eventually on local television in Washington, D.C., Petey Greene's Washington. And he is someone who basically recreated himself. He had served time in prison.
Yes, he did.
He had a substance abuse problem. I think he was an alcoholic until he died, and he represented this voice of people, Black people, who didn't have a voice. And he served as this person who channeled their voice in DC, both on this show and then eventually in the community. As I mentioned, he was unabashedly a DC phenomenon.
Yes, he was.
You know, one thing that the documentary discusses is that when there were efforts to take him to a national level, for whatever reasons, it never happened. But regardless of why it didn't happen, it seemed like he was very much content being someone from, of, and about Black Washington, D.C. And one of the details that I love about this documentary is that he really gets the sort of classic, historic Black DC stamp of approval. Like anytime you have Chuck Brown, the godfather of go-go, Marion Barry, Mayor for Life, and Mrs. Ali, who owns the iconic Ben's Chili Bowl, like you have all three of them show up to speak on you. This is someone who represents a Washington, D.C. that, you know, frankly, I think is fading away.
Yeah.
You know, just because regentrification and things change and so on and so forth. And as you mentioned, Don Cheadle made a movie based on his life, Talk to Me, but even that movie is over 10 years old at this point. So I don't even know.
Isn't it? I thought that movie came out in 2007.
It's 2024. I said it's over 10 years old.
Oh, I thought you meant at the time of this.
No. I mean now. Like even now as a document.
Oh, okay.
For this cultural phenomenon, I like that this exists. And certainly as this personality and the bit that they talk about his life, I'm glad that it exists. Because there was this whole world of these Black commentators, Black talking heads localized that you would see. You know, I can't speak to Philadelphia because these were probably local people, but, you know, you think about things that you would see in the DC area, like, you know, Tony Brown and you know, Hojo Nnamdi and these people who were, again, these local figures who held this space. And I love that about this. If it was just talking heads, I would say, okay, I like this. I'm glad it exists. They also have footage from his shows. And you know, the documentary starts out with maybe the most famous footage from Petey Greene, where he's eating this watermelon and talking about why Black people should not be embarrassed to eat watermelon. And my critique of this as a documentary is that the footage of Petey Greene himself is so provocative, so evocative, so entertaining. Every time they cut away from the footage of Petey Greene to talk about Petey Greene, I just wanted to see Petey Greene. Mm-hmm. Like as much as I love the fact that, again, the aforementioned people, Robert Hooks, who we were just talking about a few weeks ago,
Trouble Man shows up,
actually having a personal relationship. You know, Sugar Ray Leonard, people from around DC. Like, I love that they give him his flowers. I have to say, there was never a moment when someone discussed Petey Greene that I wish they didn't just show Petey Greene. Yeah. And that is, you know, I think that is something that a lot of documentaries kind of stumble. Mm-hmm. Like, the reason we made this documentary about this subject is that we think this subject is interesting enough to document. But because it's so interesting, as the viewer, you kind of want them to get out the way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's, you know, this is my bread and butter, like grainy footage from the 70s and early 80s, and a dude talking crazy and looks like it was on public access. Yeah, it was. It was like, you know, it kind of had a Bob Ross feel to it.
Or Joe Franklin.
But blacker. Mm-hmm. I love that. So, you know, I like that part of it. The other thing that I really like, that we've kind of touched on periodically, like I think about a conversation that we had after we watched a piece of the action. This moment, the television show ran from 1977 to 1983. And again, this is in Washington, D.C. Speaking of Marion Barry, this is a fascinating moment to me historically for Black people, because this is that kind of transitional moment where you know, the sort of formal part of the civil rights movement has ended. Mm-hmm. You have that kind of wave of post-civil rights Black people that graduated from college. Marion Barry famously opened up these government jobs so that Black people could move into the middle class just because of these jobs. You know, unions kind of opened up. So, you know, we talked about it in A Piece of Action, because A Piece of Act, that's the third movie in this sort of loose trilogy. But this is the one where Bill Cosby has shaved and cut his hair down a little bit, and Sidney Poitier is like, they're not working men anymore. Yeah, they're suits. Like they're wearing suits. And I'm fascinated by this moment where Black people are kind of putting together this formula of how I'm going to be middle class. Like, how have I, quote unquote, made it? And Petey Greene really represented this tension where I'm speaking for people who either A, don't buy in to what y'all are selling about, I got to do this, that, and the other to be, you know, quote unquote, middle class, or B, have been left behind. Mm-hmm. And I wish that part of it would have been sharper. Like, again, there's so much subtext that's barely subtext with him eating the watermelon and talking about black people and they're ashamed to eat watermelon. They want to cut up in little pieces and make a fruit salad and this, that, and the other. And there's so much there, but I'm glad it exists.
Yeah. Yeah. You want it to exist, but by the same token, like you just said, you still want a little bit more. Like, I agree with you that the archival footage of Petey Greene is priceless. It's absolutely priceless to see him in his element, being unapologetically who he is, right? And it is interesting to hear Robert Hooks and Chuck Brown and a lot of people who knew him from his youthful age or even when he was in prison to hear that element of him was always there, right? He remakes himself when he comes out of prison, but it basically is, does he really remake himself, or does he really just stick to his guns about, I'm never going back there again? Right?
Right.
Because he was pretty much still the same, mouth, who definitely could charm everyone he met. Maybe, they don't really talk about his education, but maybe not as book smart as everybody else, but certainly had more on the balls as far as like common sense.
Sure.
Which will take you very far. My mother has always said that. And who, when he came out of prison, recognized the power of being his authentic self. Because being his authentic self is what allowed him to survive in prison. And he realized that will allow him to survive the world of outside, recognizing that could be a prison into itself if he allowed it to be. And he was steadfast against allowing that to happen to himself. And all of that is embodied in the archival footage, like you said. What you want, like you said, is you just, if you're going to talk about him, or at least what I want, let me put it that way. If you're going to talk about him, then talk really about him. Be authentic about who he is. Because there's a lot of praise, given to the man, but I don't know how much of an exploration of the man is there. There is some, there is verbiage given to his upbringing, to him living with his grandmother, to him having a wife and having children. But there's not much exploration of that relationship. Right. That, there is, lip service given to some of his foibles, some of his drinking issues, some of his drug issues, but there's no real true examination. It basically is just lip service to say like, yeah, we mentioned it and let's move on. And I guess an argument can be made to, well, we didn't want to show that side. But this documentary is made in 2008, long past since the man had passed. Right. And like you said, even at that point, he was a figure and a name that was already being lost to time. The time you're going to get, this is probably going to be your only time at bat. In regards to giving the full account of the man. And I don't think any of that takes away from who he is. No. Because it doesn't make the argument, but certainly an argument can be made that whatever demons he gave into by way of alcohol or drugs may have been because of him fighting to be his authentic self and fight away against whatever other demons might have been calling him back to the pen.
Right.
An argument can be made about that. It would have been interesting to see all these people who seemingly had a personal relationship with him, of their thoughts in that regards. So and I found that a little missing, especially because the archival footage is so tantalizing that you wanted to get more of a sense of the man behind of who he is.
Sure.
That's doing that.
I mean, to your point, there's this amazing moment where they show him in this archival footage with two of his children.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you think, much like they did with there's this early footage with Donna Brazile.
Mm-hmm.
There's early footage with someone who went on to be the president of TV One.
Yes.
And then they circle back around. You think, well, certainly these two children, now that they're adults, have some type of input, something that they want to contribute,
something to offer
their
about
father.
who their father is.
And now I'm not trying to hit below the belt. I only bring it up because they're in the documentary. And once you introduce his family, once you introduce this, it is striking.
It becomes conspicuous that they're not
there, which, to your point, leads you to think they're not really talking about him as a man that much.
That's right.
Like, there's a lot about Petey Greene as a DC phenomenon, which obviously is what the bulk of it should be. But again, like you said, not only is this probably the only shot, but to put it in the proper context, Don Cheadle is narrating it because Don Cheadle is in the movie version of his life.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly he's won. Like, I understand the instinct to be protective of him.
Yes.
I absolutely understand. I always, one of the frustrating things about the documentary series Unsung is that, like, oftentimes the participants are so protective of the principal that you always get the sense they're holding back.
Yes.
But Unsung is it's right there in the title. This is about people who are unsung. These are about people who haven't had a chance to shape their narrative. Like Don Cheadle,
his narrative is
right. His involvement is letting you know that Petey Greene's narrative is and his legacy is secure and safe. Mm-hmm. So you can dig a little deeper. Once again, not to keep repeating ourselves, especially when the current footage is competing with 25-year-old Howard Stern in blackface.
Yeah.
And a wig.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm really happy that this sister who is an activist in DC is talking about how he served as a mentor, but can we cut back to him sitting in that butterfly chair talking crazy?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you kind of want to see.
I know.
More than anything else.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to just again repeat again, like, this is such a fascinating moment in DC's history.
It is.
With this we're knocking right on the door of crack.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as I said, the show comes on 77, goes off in 83. Like, we're right there where this is going. And I felt like there was so much opportunity to use Petey Greene as a doorway to talk about these broader issues and how he fits in there.
Yeah, I would have. I mean, and I don't know if perhaps the footage is not there, because you don't know how much, they had, because a lot of it was public access, even though it does at one time become a syndicated show.
Right, on BET apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. It would have been interesting to just see how his show shapes and move as Washington DC shapes and move, especially considering that his radio career starts pretty much in the wake of the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Right.
You know, and he actually plays a part in kind of like quieting some of the riots that are going on at that time. To see how he moves in that space, you know, as much as this show, the documentary presents him as a provocateur, as he was, they also, again, here's that word, give lip service to him as an activist.
Right.
But without saying what he's an activist for. And he actually is an activist for returning prisoners to society. But I learned that from just doing my own homework.
Right.
That's not really spoken about in the documentary itself. It's just that he is an activist.
Right.
You know, he is a voice of the people. How so is he a voice of the people? You know, it would have been nice to see some people who, you know, him being out there affected. You know, there is an interesting moment where he has an opportunity to appear on the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah.
And, you know, and this was very interesting because in the movie Talk to Me, he actually appears on a Johnny Carson show and he bombs out. But in actuality, he doesn't make it to the Tonight Show. And there's some ambiguity of it as exactly why. You know, some say he was out on a bender.
Right.
Some say he, you know, he may have been high.
Right.
You know, one of the leading theories though is that he was a little unsure about that spotlight, and he wasn't sure if he wanted that spotlight.
Well, you know, again, his manager, the person who kind of facilitated Dewey Hughes, who, if you are from the DMV, and, you know, to a certain extent nationwide, but certainly the DMV, the Hughes name is very famous because his ex-wife is, of course, Kathy Hughes, who owns TV One, and, you know, start to build her empire in DC. So that Johnny Carson moment, once again, would be a perfect time to talk about these sort of conflicting aims.
Yep.
Where, you know, Dewey Hughes certainly had aspirations to be bigger, faster, brighter. And
he mentions it to his credit. He mentions that.
He mentions it. Well, again, the Hughes family is you know, they showed and proved. That was never Petey Greene's bag.
Yeah.
But it's sitting right there to unpack. And like the bag is sitting right there for you to unpack, and they never do it.
They never turn the camera inward to
like, as you said, Dewey Hughes seems like he's open to talk. Like, he's very
he wants to go there.
He very much participated. He very much, and you have to assume how much he contributed to the film version of this Talk to Me, where, you know, he's played by Chiwetel Ejiofor and is damn near the co-star. So when you talk about Petey Greene, you have to talk about Dewey Hughes and everything that goes along with that. And it's you don't get that. And I think the real shame of it is, as you said, this may be the only documentary we ever get.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Shame. And you talk about that archival footage about Howard Stern. To his credit, Howard Stern has said often on on his radio show and in his book, Private Parts, he speaks about the inspiration that Petey Greene was for him, and that Petey Greene was an unrecognized genius in this space. And you see it as crazy as Howard Stern looks in the blackface, and you know, give him a pass if you want or not. You know, he is in his 20s at this time, and you know, knucklehead. But you see it in their exchange.
Yes, you do.
In that Petey Greene,
absolutely.
You know, he accepts it. Okay, you're going to sit there in the blackface. I'm going to let you do your thing. But then he schools him.
Yes.
He schools him and the audience about, you know, the racism inherent in his performance, but the racism that lives in both of them, but at the heart, they're the same.
Again, the power of this footage. Visually, I only know Howard Stern as the fully formed Howard Stern from the late 80s, 90s, where he is, again, fully formed. It was striking to me that they have this, you know, they're kind of going back and forth. And like you said, they're doing a bit basically, and Howard Stern is in blackface and he looks ridiculous. But when Petey Greene starts to actually teach, when the camera cuts to Howard Stern, I have never seen Howard Stern as passive and as attentive.
That's the word.
It was almost like he was in a class.
Yes, that's the word. He was attentive.
And all of the outrageousness, all of the this, that, and the other, you could tell Howard Stern was sitting at the foot of the master. And Petey Greene thought Howard Stern could learn.
Yes.
And that's way more powerful than you know, just this other stuff.
Yeah.
There's a there's a moment towards the end where Petey Greene is talking to an activist named, because I wrote it down, Midge Costanza.
Yes.
Who is a feminist activist that Petey Greene has on in the 80s. And Petey Greene is very much doing the Petey Greene stuff, and you know, he accidentally, quote unquote, calls her a broad and this, that, and the other. Sidebar, one of the observations that someone makes early in the documentary is that, you know, Petey Greene, oh, he's outrageous, so he's doing all, but they said he was always very intentional. Like, you could tell there's not one time Petey Greene said nigga or cracker or anything that you could tell I'm using this word at this moment for a specific reason. And there's a back and forth between the two of them. They show footage when the interview first starts, and Petey Greene's being outrageous, and he's doing, you know, because at this point, it's towards the end of his show. You can tell as time goes on because his hair gets a little oilier.
Yeah.
And then they kind of basically fast forward to the end of the episode. And she is so relaxed. And they're having this conversation, and Petey Greene actually lampshades it and says, this is what I wanted to happen. Like, I wanted you to be comfortable. I wanted you to get across what you're getting. He's given her this platform to talk about things. And then at one moment he jokes and says that, you know, I think you might be trying to say that I'm gay, and I'm not gay, but he doesn't say gay. And she says, oh, this, that, and the other. And then he gets serious and says, no, let's be clear. I am for gay rights. I am for everybody. I'm not trying to offend anybody. And I'm just going to keep saying it. The footage of Petey Greene with Midge Costanza did more to let me know about the complexities, the intelligence, the appeal of this man than anything that the, you know, quite frankly, quite eloquent observations that the talking heads made.
Right.
Could have.
Which is why you want the talking heads to more focus on the personal.
Which is why you want the talking heads.
Everything else.
Everything, like Petey Greene can represent Petey Greene.
Exactly.
I need you to talk about the other
The
stuff.
one that's not in front of the camera.
Right.
And
Right.
and that's the missed opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that being said, would you still recommend that people see Adjust Your Color, The Truth of Petey Greene?
I would. I think anytime our critique is we want more, like that, in my mind, that's the most backhanded Micheaux mission compliment these projects get. Like when I went in and I saw it was only 53 minutes, before I even turned it on, because I remember watching it, but then I had forgotten so much of it. I remember thinking, oh my God, why is it only 53 minutes? Like, certainly you could have done an hour and a half on Petey Greene. And by the end of the documentary, I thought the same thing. Having said that, these 53 minutes are better than nothing.
Yeah, there you go.
So I absolutely think you should watch this documentary.
So do I. I think he is definitely a life worth reliving. This, if for no other reason, the archival footage to watch. If I'm sure there's probably footage of Petey Greene out there on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube now.
Right.
But the documentary is definitely worth visiting to see this man in action. And he was quite a man. Quite a man.
And you should watch Talk to Me, which I think is a film that may have started to fade away.
That's fair. Yeah. Talk to Me is definitely worth revisiting. And then after you watch that, you can listen to our review of the film.
The quote unquote problem with Chiwetel Ejiofor, Don Cheadle, and Taraji P. Henson is that they just kept making amazingly good movies after that.
I know.
So it's like,
why couldn't you just, y'all were good.
Right.
Just go home.
Right. Taraji P. Henson, like, maybe I'll get nominated for an Academy Award twice after this.